Good morning. It is Tuesday, December 20th, but we are not actually here. We have recorded this introduction to one of our very favorite episodes for you to enjoy while we are spending time with our families. So we hope you are enjoying your holiday season too. I like your vest, by the way.
I'm cool.
You may have a vest, but you didn't even ask me about my shoes.
Well, give me another episode or two. I was going to get there. I was going to talk about the hat first, so the little green onesie thing you got going on.
The onesie thing. Yeah. Okay, so raise your hand if you like snakes. Not me.
Not my favorite.
I cannot deal with it.
But if you were watching our open mics with Dr. Stites show in August, you may recall it was all about snakes.
I remember hearing that while they are all around us here in the Midwest, we don't have to be afraid of them, just treat them with respect.
Yeah, whatever. That's right. This is where we heard from our toxicologist all about snake venom and talked to the man who was bitten by a copperhead. And I don't mean snake venom as therapy.
Right.
We also heard from the Kansas City Zoo director about their important role in our ecosystem and how snakes actually make good pets.
This is one of my favorite episodes because we sent Alexis out there and she had to handle the snake.
I remember that. And she was thrilled.
She did it very, very well. Yeah. Very proud of Alexis.
We sedated her.
That's right.
With snake venom.
Sit back and enjoy this Encore presentation. And of course, we'll be back live with all of you on Wednesday, January 4th.
Happy holidays. I'm Dr. Steve Stites, Chief Medical Officer here at the University of Kansas Health System. Thanks for joining us on another Open Mics with Dr. Stites program. We are on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. How many of you like snakes? I don't see too many hands going up. If you're like most of us, you may cringe at the thought of running into one of those critters. You know, they're not really cringe-worthy, though, just to say. And if you live in Kansas, you are likely, though, to maybe want to cringe some because sometimes snakes get a bad rap. Joining us here in the Dolph Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio to talk about snakes is Dr. Steve Thornton, Medical Director of the Poison Control Center and an emergency physician here at the health system. Steve is also a toxicologist, which makes him especially qualified to talk about this. We'll also be talking with Dakota Johnston, who knows firsthand what it's like to be bitten by a snake. And we'll be live at the Kansas City Zoo, where Alexis Del Cid will be talking with Zoo Director Sean Putney about these fascinating creatures and why they are so often misunderstood. Here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to be talking about snakes on a plane. I promised people I would make that reference today. Now I've done it. We can move on. Not snakes on a plane. Of course, we'll also be checking in with Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control, to see if we're making any headway on our COVID patient numbers. Questions from our viewers are an important part of this program. We want to hear from you. Get your questions sent in to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the Medical News Network. You can find those links right here on your screen. Let's start with a few facts about snakes. They are some of the most beautiful and misunderstood animals in nature. And I really believe that. I kind of like snakes until they're too close to me. But they are also very important to the natural environment. Snakes are found throughout the world, existing on every continent except Antarctica. And throughout the world, they are sometimes loved, but often feared by humans. The name for an intense fear of snakes is, wait for it, here we go, ophidiophobia. Say that again, ophidiophobia, the fear of snakes. In the last 2 years, more than 2.5 million snake bites around the world have caused 100,000 deaths and 400,000 long-term disabilities. Just to say it right out loud, far short of the numbers in COVID. These are the often occurring in the poorest and most rural communities of Asia, Africa, Latin America, South America, wherever, and here in the United States. But in the U.S., it's not quite so bad. The CDC reports about 7,000 to 8,000 venomous snake bites a year, with about 5 deaths. In Kansas so far this year, we've had 36 calls from across the state to the Poison Control Center about snake bites. A normal year is 40 to 50 calls, but August is the biggest month, and we're just getting in the middle of that month. Dr. Thornton, welcome to the program today.
Thank you.
We want to make sure people know the right word. Oh boy, good Lord. Right word, and it is venomous, not poisonous snakes. Can you tell us the difference?
So yeah, that's a common mix-up, I suppose, is a way to put it. And poisonous is something that contains a toxin like a mushroom. Like a mushroom's poisonous, but you wouldn't call a mushroom venomous. Venomous creatures have a mechanism to basically take a toxin they may have and apply it to other organisms, whether through fangs or stings. So a venomous creature like snakes, wasps, spiders, they have a poison and they can apply it in a way to either defend themselves or hunt prey, whereas a poisonous organism, if you eat it, you're going to get sick, but it doesn't have a mechanism to stab you. Thankfully, mushrooms don't have fangs.
Okay, so I have a question. Do you have ophidiophobia?
I do not. I've long kept snakes, all non-venomous, I will add, but I have had many snakes in my life.
Okay, well, we're not going to go too far into that, but I do want to point out that the world-famous Indiana Jones did have ophidiophobia. Yes. So snake bites are rarely fatal, but snake venom can cause us serious harm. Tell us more about that.
So we do have venomous snakes. We have about 6 species here in the Kansas, Missouri area. Primarily pit vipers is what we are dealing with in this area, and primarily copperheads. So copperheads are our big problem snake.
Are pit vipers what Indiana Jones was afraid of?
Indiana Jones I think was running into cobras, and I would probably have ophidiophobia about cobras as well, knowing what I do about them. But the copperhead is our #1 player in this area as far as venomous snake bites go, though we do have some rattlesnakes as well. And the bottom line is with any of the pit vipers, their venom is a complex mixture of different chemicals, but what it all does is it basically causes a lot of pain, swelling, tissue destruction, and can cause some problems with your blood work. It can be a very significant medical event.
You know, I think your glasses could have passed for those at Harrison Ford wore, but your hair needs to be darkened. But just saying.
Need a little more of it too.
Yeah, is a snake bite more dangerous for a child than an adult?
So there's interestingly, there's a myth out there about small snakes being more dangerous than large snakes. But what we do know is that little kids do get sicker because it's a dose event. It's basically, the snake doesn't really measure you out. The snake will apply about the same amount of venom for an adult or a child. Obviously, child being smaller, that's going to be more venom per body area, body size, and the kids can get sicker, yes.
So as the designated snake center, I'm not quite sure what that means, but designated snake center, do we keep venom on, or not venom, we keep the antidotes on hand?
So yeah, we do advertise ourselves as a comprehensive or a designated snake bite center, and what that basically means is that the health system has made the commitment to having the personnel, the facilities, and the treatment, the anti-venom, available to treat whoever may have a snake bite in the state of Kansas, state of Missouri, in this area basically. Because anti-venom, which is the treatment for venomous snake bites, is expensive, and not every hospital carries what would consider an adequate dose of the anti-venom. We don't have that problem. We got plenty of it. We can treat people adequately and successfully.
And sometimes a snake bite can actually get a lot of local reaction. You may sometimes need a plastic surgery, a lot of tissue necrosis right around the bite.
It's a very, very painful, a lot of tissue destruction, exactly. You'd like to have follow-up with the appropriate healthcare professionals. Luckily, if you get to the right facility and get treated appropriately, a lot of that can be prevented.
Yeah, and how long do you have to get to the right facility?
It's definitely a time-sensitive medical event, and I would say you want to get to a hospital within an hour or two, because the thing about antivenom is it's not going to reverse any damage that's already occurred. It's going to prevent further damage. So the sooner the better is I think, a good takeaway.
Okay, so do all hospitals have antivenom?
Most will. Some of the smaller ones don't, and that's kind of where we've kind of stepped in with the Poison Center and the health system, trying to help those smaller facilities who, unfortunately, sometimes see more snake bites because they're out in the rural areas where people are interacting with, these snakes. So it's something that's not universal for sure, and antivenom is very, very expensive. I'm not going to deny that. So there's some hospitals that simply financially just don't want to make that investment. We've made that investment, and we have plenty of it.
Dakota Johnston is one of our guests on the program today. Dakota, you were bitten by a snake. How long ago was that?
That was back in 2017, and it was a copperhead.
All right, and where were you when that happened?
I was actually camping out with a group of friends.
All right, how far were you for medical help?
Actually, not too far. I was camping out at Clinton Lake, close to Lawrence. So not too far at all. And that picture you see there is the initial bite.
Okay. Did he bite you more than once?
He actually attempted to, because I actually stepped on the snake and didn't realize I stepped on the snake. So he actually was going back for a second strike. You can tell there is a third puncture mark, very slight there.
So how sick were you?
Oddly enough, I did pretty well through it. I'd say the worst part was probably the week after the fact of getting bit and after getting the anti-venom. But the initial bite really, I did okay through, and my stay in the hospital wasn't that bad. But the aftermath was the swelling of the foot and the leg was the worst part, I will say.
Did it hurt a lot at the time of the bite, I take it?
So oddly enough, since I stepped on the snake and I kept walking because I didn't realize I actually got bit by a snake, it was like a very strong like bee sting. So it took me a second to realize what had happened, and then I turned around and went back because it was dark and turned on my flashlight, and then I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely a poisonous snake. I think that's a copperhead.
Well, it's a good thing you knew. So what'd you do?
So I went and got a couple of my friends, to make sure, yes, this is a copperhead. And then several of my friends were like, oh, you can't do a whole lot for that. You just take some ibuprofen, wait it out. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not what we're gonna do. So then I had a friend of mine take me to the hospital in
All right,
the ER.
and did you end up here at KU or did you go to Lawrence? Where'd you go?
No, I ended up at Lawrence.
All right, and they had some anti-venom for you?
Yes, they do have the anti-venom.
And how did that go?
Relatively well. I only ended up having to get one dose. I know some people ended up having to get definitely more than one dose. And I spent the night in the ICU and got released the next day. I know some people have a more traumatic experience. I was lucky enough to not have too rough of a time.
Excellent. We're going to go to the Kansas City Zoo in just a minute, but Dr. Thornton, talk to me a little bit. When he says didn't have to, what is the rough time people can experience?
So obviously the venom of these snakes is designed to work fairly quickly. So generally, what he said about the kind of feeling like a bee sting, that's a very common presentation story. They say, oh yeah, I didn't realize I was even bit. Until maybe 2 hours later, if you don't seek care, it'll definitely, you'll start to feel it. You'll see the swelling. You can see on some of the pictures, it's kind of that bruising, that ecchymosis there. And that's what it does. It kind of begins to digest you a little bit. Very painful, a lot of swelling. And as long as you get the antivenom within a relatively short time frame, you can kind of stop that, and then your body just has to recover from it. I tell people, like for instance, where he was bitten, it's going to be like the worst sprained ankle you've ever had. It's going to take a couple weeks for it to get better. It doesn't just kind of get better overnight. But obviously, the longer you let it go before getting antivenom, the worse it can be.
So now, if somebody got a copperhead bite, could they die from that copperhead bite, and how would that happen?
So when his friend says, "Oh, there's nothing you do about it," there is an urban legend that you don't get antivenom for copperheads because they don't kill people, and in general that's true. But there's a lot of suffering and pain involved in it, and we do. I think as healthcare professionals, we like to relieve pain and suffering, and that's what you're doing basically with the antivenom. Studies show that folks who get antivenom get back to basically doing what they were doing before sooner. They have less disability. They need less pain medication. So there's certainly benefits for getting antivenom in copperheads. Is it life-saving? I will grant that fortunately copperheads do not kill many people, so that is good. But still, it's very painful. I would take antivenom if I got bit by a copperhead.
Yeah, and you can lose a lot of skin and even have some limb endangerment.
And there's cases where people just never, if they're bitten in the hand, it's just never the same after that. So it's certainly, like I said, it may not kill you, but you're going to remember it.
All right, well, they may know a thing or two about snakes at the Kansas City Zoo because that's where Alexis Del Cid is live with Zoo Director Sean Putney. Alexis, how goes it this morning? I see you're holding a snake. I would never have guessed that about you. I'm just going to be honest, Alexis. I didn't see you as a snake whisperer.
Dr. Stites, I like to live on the edge. Come on now. The only bad part about this, you guys, is I have an itch on my right eyebrow, but to itch my eyebrow, I would have to bring the snake closer to my face, so I'm just going to muscle through this.
Okay.
I'm holding Ron. Ron is my new friend, and I'm here with Sean Putney, who's the director of the Kansas City Zoo. How do you know Ron's a boy?
You have to do a little invasive search. So
Like
for most snakes,
yeah.
you have to go inside of their vent,
Oh,
their
okay.
cloaca, and if it's a boy, they do have male reproductive parts down there.
Interesting. In, like, the
but
tail
for most
area.
snakes, you can't tell a male from a female. Now, that being said, usually the bigger snakes are females because
Okay.
they are doing the bulk of the reproductive. You know, this snake in particular holds eggs inside of them, so they need to be a little bit bigger.
Okay.
So if you have a Kenyan sand boa like this,
Sand boa.
that is over 30 inches, chances are it's going to be a female.
So this is a sand boa, though.
It is.
Named Ron. Now, I'm glad you brought up the females because we have this. This reminded me of the movie Twins, because right next to Ron, I have Louise. This is like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this is Danny DeVito, but reverse the genders. Louise, is she the biggest one you have here?
Yes, she's about 15 feet long. She's a Burmese python. And you can see the color on Louise. That's not natural. So for those of you who are thinking, what a pretty snake, you wouldn't find one that looks like that out in the wild. They would just get picked off by a predator. They rely on camouflage, especially when they're young, to survive, and then when they get older, to help them with their ambush predation.
So Louise, that's her natural reaction to being safe, is she turns bright?
No.
I mean, why is she so bright?
That's unnatural. That's just a genetic deformity, really.
Oh,
that wouldn't be good for them in nature, but that's something that you'll see in a captive environment. It's just been bred that way. So it's not a normal coloration. They wouldn't survive in the wild like that.
Got it. Boy, that'd be nice for us, though, to see. You could see if you were about to step on one.
True.
Tell me about Ron as far as, I should have asked you this before I was holding Ron. Is Ron venomous?
No, we do
good.
not have any venomous snakes here at the zoo in our collection. We do have some that are on grounds, but I wouldn't have given Ron to you if Ron were venomous.
Thank you for that. Do even non-venomous snakes bite?
Yes, so that's kind of a misconception that constrictors still have to bite their prey. Usually they'll be laying in wait for their prey to come by. First reaction is they bite them, then they twist their bodies around them to suffocate them, and then they consume them. So they still bite, and they still have teeth. If you were to open up Louise's mouth especially, you would see that she has some very large teeth that point backwards to her gut.
Ooh, Louise is the big one.
Yes.
So what would I see if I opened up Ron's mouth?
Same thing, smaller scale.
Okay, good. That's good for me. What does Ron eat for breakfast?
So we primarily give small mice to our snake collection.
Okay. So he could fit a whole mouse in there.
Yeah, different sizes for different
Okay.
snakes.
Right.
For Louise, it goes up to larger rats and even guinea pigs, and we'll give rabbits too.
Do you feed them live prey to mimic their environment?
No, so that's something that if you put live prey in, you take a risk on the animals that you're actually feeding, doing some damage to the animals that you're trying to feed. So if you put a rat in with them, rats have teeth too. So it's possible that they could bite the snakes.
You freeze them.
They are. We don't grow our own here. We bring them in, so they're shipped in every couple months.
Like ratsicles.
Kind of.
In the hot. So I have one last question. Actually, we've got a lot of questions for you, Sean, but I do have a question back in the studio for Dr. Thornton. Earlier in the broadcast, we had talked about how we'd had 35 snake bites this year so far, but it's only August, and a typical year is 40 to 50. And I just wanted to ask again about that. Have we had a lot of snake bites this year, or is that typical because now we're going to start heading into the cooler months?
I'd say we're en route for a fairly typical year. You know, we've gone in the last couple of years up to as many as 60 bites in a season. So I think we're heading for that kind of 50-ish range. Now, you know, nationwide we are seeing, you know, a lot more copperhead bites in particular over the last 10 years. It's kind of interesting. Fewer rattlesnake bites, but a lot more copperhead bites. And the reality is, as people move out into the country, suburbs, push out, they run into snakes more and more. And so, you know, we have seen some general increases across the country in snake bites. But Kansas, we kind of stick fairly close around that 50 range or so. And I think that's where we're going to hit this year as well.
Alexis, you are so optimistic. You just said we're heading into the cooler months. I know you're a news
I know.
person. I'm not sure you're a good
Kind of a
weather
stretch.
person. It's just a thought. Just a thought.
I mean, we occasionally still get bites in November and December. It's you know, whenever it gets warm enough out there, some of these snakes will start to move
Yeah.
around and run into people.
All right. Thank you, guys.
When you
And-
guys come back to me, I want to ask Sean about things that we can plant around our houses to maybe deter snakes from nesting around our houses and our
right.
properties, and
Scarecrows
some other
for
questions
snakes.
about that.
All right, scarecrows for snakes. We'll be back to that in just a minute. We know there's probably a lot of questions out there. Let's go head over to the studio and talk to Jessica Lavelle. Jessica, do you have ophidiophobia, and can you say it?
I can't say it, and I don't want any part of snakes. I was just as surprised as you when I just saw Alexis holding that snake. No way, no how in a million years.
So you were not
Sorry.
going to go on live to the zoo today. That's what you're saying. You're
Never
let,
gonna
you're gonna
happen.
okay, well, glad to see your
She's
generosity.
Better
We love you,
woman
though.
than me. Better woman than me. So, Dr. Stites, good to see you, by the way. We do have a few questions, so I want to try to get to these. Alice says, this is why she doesn't like snakes. Alice doesn't like them because she can't tell which ones are venomous. So, to either of our guests, how do you tell which are which?
You know, that's a great question because just be honest, you don't really want to get up close and personal to figure it out, Steve.
So first rule is just consider them all. Just leave all snakes alone is a good good mantra to live by. If you're the very inquisitive type, you can look for certain characteristics. Most of the venomous snakes we have in this area are going to be fairly bulky, kind of almost fat kind of snakes. They're not going to be that ribbon, fast-moving one that you see zip across your yard. They're going to have kind of a triangular head. Those are kind of more obvious clues. Obviously, if you see the fangs, you know you're dealing with a venomous snake. But in general, I think the good advice is just leave all snakes alone. Most snakes don't want any part of you, and just leave them alone.
Sean Putney at the zoo. Is Sean still alive? Okay, no worries. I'll get back to him in just a minute. Okay, Jess.
Okay, so question from Yen Liang. He says there are also many snakes in Taiwan, especially in the mountains. So he wants to know, what should we do if we are bitten? So what should we do if we're bitten? We're not close to any sort of medical care.
So as we kind of
So I just real quick. I don't think you're supposed to suck on the wound. That used to be the thing when I was in Boy Scouts a long time ago. We even had the little suction kits.
Exactly, and so that's one of the big challenges with snake bites, especially in some of these underdeveloped third world type situations where there is not a lot you can do other than antivenom. What we recommend people do is basically kind of treat the wherever they're bit, just treat it kind of like that's a broken limb. So you put it in a sling, you keep it elevated, and you try to get to a healthcare facility. Fortunately here in the United States, we deal with almost solely pit vipers, which do not paralyze you. However, in other parts of the world, there are cobras and elapids, which do paralyze you and present a whole different kind of problem that we don't have to deal with here, like I said, thankfully. So, when you're talking about, especially Southeast Asia, that is where snake bites are a huge public health problem. It's a big deal there, obviously, as we talked about some of the stats early on. And really, in that situation, you're kind of depending on what snake it is, and because normally we don't recommend tourniquets. However, if it's a cobra, you might consider a tourniquet because you don't want that venom to get to your diaphragm and paralyze you so you can't breathe. So it gets really complicated in other parts of the world. We're kind of lucky here in the United States.
And just to say, water moccasins and rattlesnakes, how are they as far as danger compared? Because that's really the other two big ones here.
Yeah, exactly. So rattlesnakes are by far the most potent venomous snake we have here in the United States. There are coral snakes, which are a relative of the cobra, but they're very rarely seen, very small. It's a kind of a one-off sort of thing. But rattlesnake bites, yeah, they cause a lot of morbidity. All the mortality is pretty much associated with rattlesnake bites. Water moccasins, which we don't really have in Kansas but are more in Missouri, are reported to be very aggressive snakes. They're kind of the one that might chase you, is what people will talk about. Their bites are obviously a little worse than copperheads, but not quite as bad as rattlesnakes.
Jess?
Kathy wants to know, is anti-venom generic or specific to different types? And does Dakota know which one he had?
Well, I can tell you here again, in the United States, we're very lucky. We have a one-size-fits-all antivenom for all of our rattlesnakes, copperheads, water moccasins. We have one, actually now two antivenoms, but they all treat all the snakes. So we're very fortunate. We don't have to know exactly what snake you were bitten by, as long as it wasn't a coral snake, and there's no coral snakes around here, so we don't have to worry about that here in the Kansas, Missouri area. So basically, it is a one-size-fits-all, very effective. It is not generic. If it was generic, it would be a lot less expensive.
How long did it take for Dakota to fully recover?
I would say it probably took me close to a week to fully recover before I was able to fully walk again and go back to living basically on my own and by myself because I had to spend a week with my mother for her to help me.
Well, glad you're better. Okay, Dr. Seitz, I've got a couple for Sean, so hit me up when you get him back on the line.
All right, we'll be back to you, and we're going to look forward to that. In the meantime, we're going to now move to talk to Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control here at the Health System, with today's COVID count.
Yeah, COVID count is similar to what it was and really what it has been for the last couple weeks, high 20s. Right now we have 26 active infections with 4 in the ICU, 3 on the ventilator, unfortunately, and 18 in that recovery period. But Steve, from looking at the latest graphs, it seems like the cases, again the reported cases, somewhat may be on a trend, a downtrend. Hospitalizations maybe look to have plateaued or starting that downtrend. So hopefully we can hope that those trends continue.
And that's certainly that seems to be the trend we're seeing here. I mean, we got up to around 40, 45 for acutes, and now we're down in the mid-20s. So I think we're seeing a downtrend. We like that. Yeah. But, Fauci yesterday said, hey, we're still worried about the BA5 variant.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think we are getting into this kind of lame duck period as far as boosters, because there's a lot of questions, when should I get my booster? Really should have had that, if you are 50 and above, should have had that second booster quite some time ago. Now we're getting close to where they are hoping to roll out this new formulation of the vaccine or booster. Again, what will the full clinical efficacy about protection from hospitalization, because we know the vaccines we have right now, if you are up to date, continue to very well protect you against hospitalization.
So if we pop up the New York Times heat map, I think the heat map, if you follow with us very much, you'll see there is less dark colors here. Still looking over to the kind of Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia area, and Ohio. But across the rest of the country, it may be decreasing just a little bit, but that's probably consistent. It's no worse than plateaued. It's probably a little better, to your earlier points. And if you follow the numbers nationally, you'd say, yeah, things are starting to taper off a little. So what's going to be next, I wonder? You mentioned we're sort of in this I forgot what period you call it, some night lullaby period, something like that, where things are a little quieter. But I think the fear is the next variant could come along.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing of the rise of any new major variant. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think, a few weeks ago there was one that was in
like
out
1,
of
2,
India,
3, 4, something, yeah.
But that really hasn't taken off. We've still seen that BA5. So I think in some modeling early on this spring, they were looking towards October, November maybe being a new wave. What that will be, who knows, but again, that is just modeling, so take it with that caveat. So hopefully right now we continue to be in that lull. We get through to when the new vaccine rollout and recommendations are, and we can get people boosted at that point.
Lull, lullaby, snakes on a plane. We are on a roll today.
Yeah.
Just to say, though, I think the other thing about BA5 that is important to remember is that it's incredibly highly contagious. This is like chickenpox. I mean, it's so easy to spread. But at the end of the day, I think the next iteration is what we may be concerned about, in that if it maintains that ability to spread rapidly, people don't get another vaccine. It goes 3 to 6 months after they've had their last COVID infection. That's when things are vulnerable, and you move back inside for the winter when we really do hit, Alexis, those cooler months. And so I think that's really the thing we have to look out for. And we'll stay abreast of that on this program, but that's the thing I think we have to be most concerned about.
I think you're exactly right, and you bring up a good point about moving inside. People will be doing things more in those inside spaces, probably poorly ventilated, being close together. But remember, this past influenza season, we really had 2 spikes, and we had quite a bit more influenza this past season than we did the previous 1 or 2 seasons. So it's going to be important to evaluate for that, and remember to stay up to date on that vaccination as well.
So it looks like school vaccine mandates for COVID-19 are not happening. We're seeing some reports about that coming across the country. It's like folks have kind of just relaxed a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand and get it. And I think, I think the vaccine really, it seems like you are going to have to do the best thing for you and your child. There was a new report in CDC's MMWR recently just about, everybody continues to have this myth that children are not affected by COVID-19, and that is absolutely false. Now, the rate of having complications is certainly less than older children and adolescents and adults, but they still are affected. Things like higher risk of diabetes, heart complications, other organs as well. And so I think it's important, really protect your child as much as possible, or your grandchild. If you know children, get them vaccinated.
So the one crucial step you may be missing in that COVID self-test at home?
Yeah, I think we are just here. It's about what we have talked about in the cases. We know the cases are probably not reported accurately just because there are less testing sites. People are testing more at home and not reporting them, or they aren't testing because they know they've been exposed and probably assume they have it as well. And so, we're not getting an accurate idea of cases, but just as we have said, Steve, it's probably more an accurate bellwether of really hospitalizations at this point. And what we are continuing to see is those people that are hospitalized are either unvaccinated, partially vaccinated, or not up to date with their vaccine.
Or just so very severely immunocompromised, don't respond to anything. Okay, ABC News is reporting the CDC sending a team to New York City. There was one case of polio reported there. We haven't seen polio approximately for a very long time.
Yeah, this is bad news. I think everybody should take this to heart. And I say this in the context of we have vaccines to combat these vaccine preventable diseases. I think within the last year or 6 months, we had heard a politician somewhere wanted to do away with vaccine mandates. And this is absolutely the worst public health thing to do. This is the worst individual health thing you can do for your children. Right now, we have the context of really not understanding how much morbidity and mortality, how much disease and death occurred from these diseases now that we've virtually eradicated and certainly reduced the risk of. And I think this is one more case to exemplify that if your children are not up to date with these vaccines, please go get them vaccinated. We know that the risk of poliomyelitis paralysis is about 1 in 100 to 200 cases. That's not much, but what if it is your child?
Exactly.
So we are going back to school. Please talk with any of your healthcare providers if you have children. Get them up to date with their vaccines.
And just to say, the long-term problem with this is, I don't want to get vaccinated. It's a low risk of having polio. Okay. You may not be paralyzed, but there are long-term complications to polio.
Yeah.
And having been the old guy in the room, I think I'm probably the old guy in the room. When I first started in pulmonary disease, we still saw those patients who had long-term complications from the polio of the 40s and the 30s and the 50s. And it's not something you want to subject yourself to. This idea that vaccination isn't important is such a fabrication.
Yeah.
It's just false. Yeah. It's like, okay, guys, stay in your lane. We'll stay in our lane. We're going to talk healthcare. You stay in your lane, wherever that lane may be. And the reality is that the reason we feel safe is because we don't see polio. Right? We don't see smallpox. Yeah. We don't see mumps. We don't see much measles, mumps, and rubella. But all of a sudden, if you don't have the vaccination, you will see those things. Yeah. And the things you're going to see, because I've seen them, they're not pretty, Hawkeye. They're not pretty.
And I think that's a great point. As our population grows, as our population gets older, as we continue to have more and more people who have immune suppression or immune deficiency for one reason or other, whether it's chemotherapy, whether they've had a solid organ transplant and need to be on immunosuppression, whether it's a rheumatologic disease and need to be on immunosuppression, we know unequivocally that those people are more at risk of further complications from these diseases as well. So it's important to protect other people also.
Okay, just one more question for you. I shaved my head a long time back in May for that Shave to Save event. And I'd really planned for my hair to grow back. And I'm watching myself on the screen up here in the monitor. I'm seeing that my hair is not growing back on top. Is there vaccination for that? Is that under development by the CDC? What's your recommendation?
I think they need to look at some mRNA technology for that, yeah.
Okay, Thanks for that. Glad you're on board. All right, back to our discussion on snakes now. Joining us in the studio is Dr. Steve Thornton, the Medical Director for Poison Control. He's also an emergency department physician. He's also the head of toxicology here at KU. We don't talk about that enough, but that's actually approximately a very big deal. Live via Zoom is Dakota Johnston, who has been bitten by a snake, and we're also live at the Kansas City Zoo with Alexis Del Cid and zoo director Sean Putney. By the way, Sean, just to say, I love the zoo. Dr. Thornton, what are some of the do's and don'ts? Yeah, I do. My kids love that zoo too. Dr. Thornton, what are some of the do's and don'ts if you're bitten by a snake? And let me guess, one of the do not do is to panic.
So yeah, so there's a lot of don'ts. So don't panic. Basically try and stay calm. Obviously easier sometimes said than done, but nonetheless, don't cut it, don't suck it, don't electrocute it. Believe it or not, there was a thing going around where people were using electricity.
Shock the
Yeah,
there
was a theory out there that it would denature the venom. Don't put gunpowder in it and explode it.
Should I take some, what was it, ammonium and inject it under my skin? That was one of the plans.
Anything that would involve injecting or cutting or sucking is all pretty bad. All you're going to do there is basically cause more damage, more infection, really cause infection. What we recommend is, again, treating it like you injured it, from a sprain, strain, whatever, putting it in a splint, elevating it, and getting to a healthcare facility where they can get you evaluated and see, do you need antivenom or not?
Okay. So in the olden days, you would cut off, okay, wait a minute, I knew about that. That makes me old. Okay, so in the olden days, you cut off the snake's head and sucked out the venom from the bite. Bad idea.
Bad idea.
What about the cutting off of the snake's head?
So we do get a lot of beheaded snakes that are brought in, primarily because folks think that we need to know exactly what snake bit them, and that is not here. Again, in the United States, that's not really the case. We don't need to know if it's a copperhead, water moccasin, prairie rattler, timber rattler. It's a one-size-fits-all antivenom, so we're fortunate. So just leave the snake alone, because there's a lot of people who end up getting bit a second or third time as they go to try to kill the snake, or somebody else tries to kill the snake and they get bit. So just leave the snake alone and get health care.
So once the snake bites you, does it still have venom to bite someone else?
It has plenty of venom to bite somebody else. Yes,
an old wives' tale on that one too. That once they bite, they're going to die.
Exactly. I had a case when I was in fellowship where 3 Marines got bitten by the same snake.
Excellent.
So, yes.
That was
yes,
a prolific.
Yeah,
that was a feisty snake. So okay, what are some of the biggest myths about snake bites?
Well, I think a lot of the myths about how to treat it, about in the cutting, sucking, whatnot. Really, these antivenom is the gold standard treatment. Antivenom will work for these the snake bites here, in the United States. And all I can recommend is just making sure you don't make things worse. Get to a healthcare facility, and then make sure that healthcare facility is comfortable treating snake bites. Have them call the Poison Control Center. Have them call here. We'll help walk them through it.
All right. How many doses of antivenom do you give to somebody?
It, to some degree, depends on how they respond. Most copperhead bites, like Dakota said, it's 1 dose and you're done. Okay. It does not take a lot. Rattlesnake bites can take many doses. Sometimes you're talking 20, 30 vials of antivenom, whereas with most copperheads, it's about 4 vials, so the kind of 1 dose.
All right. Dakota, did you follow all this great advice that you've heard from Dr. Thornton today? Did that play out in your life?
It sure has, yes. One of the biggest things that he said is that most people probably do is don't panic, because that was one thing that I knew not to do, but everyone else around me was starting to panic, and I was like, this is not what we're not supposed to do, so don't panic.
All right, and now there's also an old story that you shouldn't run after a snake bite because it'll circulate around your body faster.
Well, in some sense, that is true. It will spread the venom a little bit faster. It's not such a huge deal with our type of snakes. Obviously, in other countries where cobras and whatnot are around, that could be a little bit more problematic. But again, it kind of comes back to where I said, just sling it, elevate it, splint it. If you've got bit in the foot, try and get your foot elevated. That'll help with the swelling in the long term as well. But in general, just get to a healthcare facility. That's what you want to do.
Okay, Dakota, do you have long-term side effects from this bite?
I do not. I feel like because I was bit in the ankle and a little bit more fattier tissue of the ankle, that is maybe a reason why I don't have any long-term effects, and because I got the antivenom within a couple hours as well. So I am lucky that I don't. It would be kind of nice to have maybe still a puncture wound and have that little scar to tell, but unfortunately I don't have that.
All right, so now, Dr. Thornton, I'm supposed to be out camping this weekend in the Ozark Woods on a river, far from help and no way to get to a car or something in the middle of the night. What do I do if I get bit by a snake there?
Well, depending on where you're bit, try to get it immobilized. Like I said, treating it like a broken limb, and then make sure you got someone who can drive you to a hospital.
Okay.
There's no, unfortunately, we have not yet created a at the site treatment for venomous snake bites. People are working on stuff like that, but we don't have it readily available yet.
And if I got bit by a snake and I don't know if it was poisonous, what do I do?
That's a very common situation. We still recommend you go to the healthcare facility. What they'll do there is they'll observe you. They'll watch for that pain, swelling, like Dakota had. They'll check some blood work, because not every snake bite is a venomous snake bite. Not every snake bite needs antivenom. That's where you need that health professional to kind of help figure that out.
So can I ice my foot or leg if I'm bit there?
You can certainly put some cold compresses. We've had people, again, make things worse by freezing it. Some people burn it. So again, in general, the less is more when it comes to snake bites in the pre-hospital setting.
Dakota, is there anything as you look back that you would do differently now?
No, I don't think so. Other than the fact of maybe I would have had my flashlight on or had my boots on instead of my flip-flops at the time.
I think that's always a good idea out in the woods in the middle of the night. By the way, as I listened to your story, you were like the perfect guest, Dakota, because you did it right. And that sends an important message to our listeners. If you do it right, you can get the help you need. You can do okay. Don't do it wrong. All right, let's go back to the Alexis Del Cid, live at the Kansas City Zoo with Zoo Director Sean Putney and her new friend, Ron. Is that still Ron there,
right.
Alexis?
Ron.
You and
Ron
Ron have gotten pretty
bonding.
acquainted. Is Ron going home with you?
I know. He's been giving, I'd have to ask my husband about that one. He's not the jealous type, but I don't think he'd like Ron in the house.
Okay, and
I
one
have a
thing,
question,
Alexis,
though, for
you do
Sean.
look a little terrified.
Oh, yeah.
I said you still look just slightly
think so?
terrified or uncomfortable,
Well,
just to say.
I'm alert. I'm staying
excellent
alert.
play.
No, I asked Sean if he was giving me kisses, and Sean said that every time Ron sticks out his tongue, he's actually smelling me.
Yeah,
right?
Right. And she's doing wonderfully. There's a lot of folks out there that we would probably shy away from allowing to hold the snake, but she's been doing great.
Well, thank you for letting me hold him. We talk a lot about how to avoid snakes, and obviously you don't want to step on a snake and get bit. But what benefits do snakes have for the environment? Like, we're told don't kill spiders because they eat mosquitoes. What do snakes do?
There's a lot of benefits. Mostly they're keeping the rodent population down.
Okay.
In fact, there are some cultures down in South America that have a certain type of snake sort of as pets around their households to keep the rodent population down. And as we all know, rodents oftentimes are bringing with them diseases
Right.
that are more harmful to them than a snake would be. So they're very beneficial. They have their place in the world, and just because of the look of them, they do look the creepy, crawly, and so much different than humans. Oftentimes, the first reaction from people is to try to get them off their property or to hit them with a shovel. And chances are, if you have a snake on your property, it's because they are eating things that, like mice and other rodents that you probably don't want there either.
Does Ron recognize you or your scent?
Probably not. I don't know that I'd give him that much credit. Maybe, certainly not me. Maybe with the other
Would he recognize his
staff. And like I said before, Ron is a part of or used to be a part of our outreach program. So he's very used to being handled.
Yeah, he's getting more calm. He keeps going. When he gets into Sean's arms, he moves more slowly because you're warmer.
Right.
But he tends to also want to go hang out in your armpit.
I let him burrow.
You burrow in your pit. Is that because he likes to burrow in the sand all the time?
Yeah, they're lion weight predators. What they do, they live anywhere from Egypt down to Kenya, and they'll burrow in the sand, lightly burrow in the sand and wait for animals to come by them so that they can jump up and grab them for their food.
We talk about snakes being venomous, but I just learned that catfish are also venomous?
So their spines, and a lot of people when they're handling catfish, catfish have very small teeth.
Right.
But if you were to hold them incorrectly and happen to get one of those spines in you, it's a very mild venom, and I'm sure that the other folks who are on the call today can go into more detail, but a lot of times you'll get some swelling associated with that.
Really?
Because of the fact that it was kind of injected into your skin. It's not nearly as bad as some of the venomous snakes are.
But this catfish has to be alive on a hook in your boat, not on your plate where like you get poked with a
Correct,
bone.
yeah.
Okay, that's good because I like catfish. What about if you want to plant things around your house to deter snakes? What would you plant?
So I don't know that I would recommend any sort of plant. There's nothing out there that I can think of that snakes would not like. The problem with planting stuff around your house is you're allowing for more potential homes for rodents and more potential homes for these guys to hang out.
Okay.
So if you have rock gardens and other things for snakes to hide in and crawl around, you're really providing a better environment for them to hang out.
Do you ever have wild snakes come onto the zoo property to kind of check out
Sure.
their snake friends at the condos?
They don't necessarily come in here to hang out, but we do have plenty of snakes on zoo grounds. We do see copperheads 2 or 3 times a year, but very, very uncommon. Most of the snakes that we have are black snakes or water snakes.
And do people report them to you?
Yes. In fact, a lot of times we'll get reports of the water snakes being water moccasins, and we have to do a little educational moment.
Because they do look like
A little similar.
a little bit. I'm going to toss it back to the studio because I know Jess said she had lots of viewer questions for you as well.
Time out. I get a
Dr.
question for
Stites
Sean
does.
first. I have a question for Sean. Sean.
Okay.
You've mentioned some creatures that are not troublesome, but I want to know what you guys are trying to do. One of the most troublesome venomous creatures in Missouri, chiggers. Have you solved chiggers?
Chiggers.
We don't do too much about them. Fortunately, we do keep all of our areas that are right beside the pathways nicely mowed, so people aren't going to get chiggers jumping on them.
What eats chiggers?
Other insects. So,
We need more of those other insects.
but-
That's what I think.
But I don't know. I don't know exactly which those would be. So yeah, they're not a favorite of mine either.
Right.
All right.
They're not a fan favorite.
No.
Yeah, not so much. God did not make many mistakes. Chiggers could be one. Jess, I'm going to come back to you for some questions, either reporter or from our community.
Okay, so, first of all, Alexis, I have to say, like I said, better woman than me. I was kind of jealous that you got to go out there today, and now I'm watching you. My heart is
Right.
racing, and I'm thinking, I wouldn't have even been able to stand next to Sean holding that snake. So you are in the right spot
You know what?
today.
Do you remember the VMAs where Britney Spears held the snake?
Yes, that's you.
Okay, it was this kind of a snake. It was Louise, not Ron.
Okay, so I have a question about Louise actually for Sean, because you hear these scary stories in the news about someone having a python like that as a pet and them wrapping themselves around you. So my question to Sean, is that natural? Is that just what pythons like that do? Are they naturally prone to wrap themselves around someone, even an owner that they're loyal to?
So you have to remember that many snakes are climbers. So it is common for snakes to wrap themselves around people because they feel more comfortable when they're wrapped around, so they're not going to fall. Now, ground dwellers like Louise, they are constrictors, and the bigger they get, the bigger the prey they want to have. So there have been cases where a very large Burmese python has been known to kill humans, especially younger ones. So you have to be really careful when you're choosing pets and what you're allowing them and not allowing them to do. But for the most part, snakes aren't going to see humans as a food source, and they're not going to, especially wild snakes, the majority of them are just trying to get away from you. And I'm sure that everybody would agree that the majority of snake bites happen just by happenstance or defense mechanism by the snakes.
Kathy wants to know, what's a typical lifespan of a snake? Maybe Sean, you can tell us what the lifespan of those snakes are, and then Dr. Thornton, what about just our local snake population?
So a real good rule of thumb for snake lives, 20 years old is a pretty old snake, and the bigger they are, usually the longer lifespan they have. So most of your smaller snakes, the common snakes from around here, 20 years would be a long life for them. But something along the lines of a Burmese python, they might get to be 40 or 50 years old or more.
Yeah, I would echo that.
Fascinated with the camera.
That most of our local snakes are going to be in the 5 to 10 kind of. Obviously, shorter lifespans when they interact with humans. That's for sure.
Jennifer wants to know, so if somebody has been bit by a snake like Dakota, are they now immune to it now that they've had the anti-venom? And what does that mean for future snake bites? Hopefully Dakota won't have any more, but what if he did?
So that's an interesting question. We don't have a lot of repeat offenders in that regard. In theory, there could be a little bit of immunity. We do know from herpetologists who've worked at zoos in the past that certainly getting bit multiple times can endow some degree of immunity, but I'm not sure if just one is enough, to be honest.
You don't need a booster.
Yeah, maybe there's a randomized controlled trial.
Yeah, we're still waiting to enroll the patient. People in that study.
Not too quick in the enrollment.
Vince actually has a booster question. Do you need a polio booster?
You know, right now we don't know the extent of that durability of that vaccine, but right now there is no recommendation to need a polio booster. Now, I went back to my immunization records, and we used to get the oral polio vaccine, which they use in most parts of the world, especially where it's more difficult to get to those immunization campaigns and getting those out to the people. Right now in the United States we use the injectable type, but there's no recommendation right now for polio vaccine. If you've had the vaccine, you will be protected from that disease, especially that the poliomyelitis paralysis disease.
And we really don't see much late onset polio from people who have gotten vaccinated. It's not like when you hit 70 or 80. The only population that may be a risk for something like BMT and things like that, but bone marrow transplants, et cetera. But really, it's not a disease we see frequently. And we would know if it was because people get such severe respiratory complications like when they do contract polio later in life as opposed to earlier in life. So.
Okay, last question is from Michelle. She says that she's heard that even non-venomous snakes can carry diseases like rabies. Is that true, and how common if it is?
So snakes can carry some certain bacteria. They do not carry rabies, but salmonella complicates some reptiles. Interesting though, almost all of our venomous snake bites, none of them get infected. We don't treat them with antibiotics. So that's actually one thing we don't have to worry about with venomous snake bites. But like with any animal, there's always potential for them carrying some bacteria, but rabies would not be one of them.
All right. Well, this has been a pretty cool program today. I've learned a lot. I'm reminded of that song, I don't like spiders and snakes, but I've got what it takes to love you, something like that. I don't know what that song really means. It's kind of odds and words, maybe a little odd. I may have messed it up, but I think that means that Alexis Del Cid is in love with Ron. I think her husband should be concerned because I think she's got a new person or a man in her life, or snake. That's good. All right.
A new man in my life. I know usually women avoid snakes, right?
Well, we're here for you, Alexis. We're not causing. We're not going to cause any aspersions on your character there, though. So. Yeah.
Thank you. No judgments, right?
Yes. All right. Let's get back to Alexis. So, final thoughts from Zoo Director Sean Putney. Sean, thank you for being on the program today. Final thoughts.
Oh, thanks for letting us be a part of it. We appreciate it and hope to see you all at the zoo sometime soon.
All right. I'm going to turn next to. Go ahead. Go ahead,
I was just going to ask Sean, if you have any message for people who are terrified of snakes. Like Jess is sitting back there, and I gotta say, it's really not scary when you're actually holding the snake. And it, what would you say to other people who are frightened of snakes and afraid. I mean, there's a difference between cautious and then.
Well, I'd definitely say always be cautious,
Yeah.
especially if you don't know what type of snake you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But just remember that snakes do serve a purpose, so just killing them for being there doesn't really help matters at all. There are ways that you can calm your fears, but with a lot of phobias, there's just not much you can do about it. So I have seen some people try to go and touch snakes and to just ease their fears, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to want to hold a snake like you are.
Or it doesn't mean they should go out and just grab any old snake in their
definitely
garden.
not. Definitely
Right.
don't do that.
Right.
All right, yeah, let's make sure we train people the correct way around that. Let's go turn to Dakota Johnston. Dakota, final thoughts for today.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Final thoughts for today.
Kind of like Sean said, you should definitely stay away from snakes. Doesn't matter if they're poisonous or not. I did not have a phobia of snakes before, but I definitely do now, and do have a little PTSD from it, even though it was a smooth sail for me compared to what other people have to endure, I'm sure.
All right, so now you have a little ophidiophobia, and I just want to say that word one more time in the program. And also, you're a farm tech, I understand, from at LMH, so I'm sure you're dedicated. They sounds like they took great care of you, and as a farm tech, you may have be responsible now for dispensing anti-venom to patients.
Yes, I've actually never had the luxury of mixing it myself, and I don't actually do that part of the job anymore. But it does take quite a while to mix it. So that is why it's very important to get to a healthcare facility as fast as you can and get the anti-venom if need be.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the program today. Dr. Thornton, thanks for being back.
Yes, thank you.
Final thoughts.
Well, I would echo the live and let live when it comes to snakes. And if you are bitten, just stay calm and get to a healthcare facility.
All right. Excellent advice, Dr. Hawk.
Yeah, just good show, good information. Again, hope everybody stay safe, and we'll continue to endorse the fact if you are needing to be up to date on your vaccines, please check with your medical providers, check with your child's pediatrician, get everybody up to date on vaccines, and really they work, they will protect you and reduce those risks of those complications.
Well, somehow today my final thought is this. I was trying to tie Star Trek into this because they had Gorn, which are reptiles, and so I was going to try and make some reference to snakes. I couldn't quite make it work today. Usually I can come up with strange ways to bring back Star Trek. I would like to also then hum the theme to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I believe that's a copyright infringement, though from my singing no one could really tell that, so I think I could deny it. But at the end of the day, what I hope you take away from this program is this. Mother Nature is full of wonderful surprises, and the best thing you could do with snakes is leave them alone because they're a really important part of our life overall and the things they help to protect us from. We just need to respect that with snakes.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and open mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now, everywhere podcasts are available.